I was 18 when this happened. I was preparing for my college entrance exams at a coaching center near my house. At that age, almost everything in my life revolved around studying. I would go to school in the morning, come home for a few hours, and then spend most evenings at coaching. It was exhausting, but I was determined to get into a good college. That's where I met John. He was a new student who joined our batch about halfway through the year. I noticed him on his first day. He had long, messy hair that reached almost to his shoulders, wore dark clothes every day, and always sat by himself at the very back of the classroom. He didn't seem interested in making friends. Most of the other students thought he was strange. I thought he was interesting. I can't really explain why. Maybe it was because he was different from everyone else. Maybe it was because he seemed completely comfortable being alone. Or maybe I was just 18 and stupid. Within a couple of weeks, I started talking to him. He was actually very friendly. We talked about music, movies, college, and eventually everything else. I started sitting near him during breaks. There were already rumors about him. Some students said he had been expelled from another coaching center. Someone claimed he'd gotten into a fight with another student. Another person said his family was involved in some illegal business. I never believed any of it. Whenever someone warned me about him, I defended him. I told them they were judging someone they didn't know. John seemed grateful for that. Eventually, we became pretty close. One evening after class, he asked me if I wanted to come to his house. He said we could hang out for a while before I went home. I hesitated, but he lived relatively close, and I'd known him for several weeks by then. So I agreed. That was the first mistake I made. His house was in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes from the coaching center. The outside looked completely normal. It was an older 2-story house with a small front yard. Nothing about it looked threatening. John unlocked the door and let me inside. The smell hit me immediately. It smelled stale, like smoke, chemicals, and something rotten underneath it. The living room was a disaster. Clothes were thrown over chairs. Empty bottles covered a table. There were cigarette burns on the arm of the sofa. The curtains were closed, even though it was still daylight. I remember joking about the mess. John laughed and told me his father was going through a difficult period. Then he told me to sit down. He disappeared into the kitchen. I could hear cabinets opening. Something heavy hit the counter. Then silence. He came back carrying 2 glasses. He handed one to me. I looked down. There was something floating near the bottom. It was tiny, white. At first, I thought it was a piece of ice, but it didn't look like ice. I tilted the glass. The object moved slowly through the liquid. I looked at John. He was watching me. What? He asked. I told him there was something inside. His expression changed for just a second. Then he laughed. It's nothing. He reached for the glass. I pulled it away. He stopped smiling. I told him I needed to use the bathroom. He pointed down the hallway. Last door. I walked away. As soon as I turned the corner, my instincts started screaming at me. I don't know how else to describe it. Something felt wrong. The hallway was extremely dark. There were no family photographs, no decorations, nothing that made the place feel lived in. Just doors. 3 of them were locked. I entered the bathroom and closed the door. Then I saw the shelf. There were rolls of duct tape, heavy plastic restraints, thick rope, and several tools that looked completely out of place in a bathroom. There were also bloodstains on the floor, old ones, browned, dried. I stopped breathing. I looked at the bathtub. There were dark stains around the drain. I backed away. Then I noticed something behind the toilet. A black plastic bag. It had been tied shut. There was something inside. Something that looked vaguely human-shaped. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to know. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. I needed to call someone. Anyone. I had barely unlocked the screen when I heard footsteps outside. John, everything okay? I didn't answer. The footsteps stopped. Are you in there? I locked the door. There was silence. Then I heard him breathe. Right outside. I backed toward the window. Opened the door. His voice was calm. Almost too calm. I didn't answer. The handle moved. Once, twice, then harder. Opened the door. I started dialing emergency services. That's when his voice changed. Why are you calling someone? I froze. He knew. The handle began violently shaking. I screamed. John slammed his shoulder into the door. The wooden frame cracked. I backed toward the window. He hit it again. The door shook so violently that dust fell from the ceiling. Open the door. I climbed onto the sink. The window was tiny. I tried pushing it open. It wouldn't move. Behind me came another impact. Crack. The door frame split. I pushed harder. The window finally opened. Cold air rushed inside. I heard wood breaking behind me. I climbed through. John screamed something.
Oh, ich kann kotzen!
I couldn't understand. I dropped onto the ground outside. I landed hard on my ankle. Pain shot through my leg. I didn't care. I ran. I ran barefoot because I'd lost one of my shoes, climbing through the window. I could hear John shouting behind me.
Oh, ich kann kotzen!
I didn't look back. I reached the main road and collapsed beside a parked car. My hands were bleeding. My clothes were covered in dirt. I called the police and told them everything. Several officers arrived at the house. They arrested John, but they didn't stop there. His father was inside the property, and what the police found in that house was far worse than anything I had imagined. There were hidden rooms, false walls, boxes of drugs, photographs, personal belongings belonging to people who weren't members of the family, and evidence that the house was being used as part of a much larger criminal operation. John and his father were eventually charged with multiple serious crimes involving drugs and the trafficking of vulnerable young people. Some of the evidence suggested that people had been held inside the property. I never never learned all the details. I didn't want to. I already had enough nightmares. For several weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I heard footsteps outside my bedroom, I would sit upright. Every time someone knocked on my door unexpectedly, my heart would start racing. I stopped going to the coaching center for a while. When I eventually returned, John's seat was still there. Nobody sat in it. There was something strangely disturbing about seeing that empty chair, because I could still picture him sitting there, quietly, smiling, looking completely normal. That's what bothered me the most. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like an ordinary 18-year-old guy. Someone you could sit beside in class. Someone you could talk to. Someone you could trust. And I almost did. A few months later, I found out something that made me feel sick. One of the girls from my coaching center had apparently tried to warn me about John. She had heard rumors about his family and told another student that she didn't trust him. I never heard about it until after his arrest. I kept thinking about how easily things could have ended differently. If I had taken that drink, if I hadn't noticed the bathroom supplies, if that window hadn't opened, if the police had arrived 5 minutes later, I don't know what would have happened. I don't want to know. I still remember the moment I looked at that glass and saw something floating inside it. At the time, I thought I was being paranoid. Now I think that tiny detail may have saved my life. I haven't spoken to John since that night. I don't know where he is now, but whenever I meet someone new who seems interesting because they're mysterious or different, I remember him. And I remember something I wish I'd understood when I was 18. Sometimes your instincts notice the danger long before your mind is willing to admit it. And sometimes the person everyone tells you to stay away from is exactly the person you should have listened to them about.